Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Tuesday now, January 29th, 2019. Let's get the frog out of the throat. Well, we'll just wait for him to return. I'm sure he'll be back anytime now. And I didn't really mean to assume the frog's gender. I haven't examined closely. But apparently we're intimate, so I guess I might as well introduce myself and see if I can figure that one out. Okay. Good morning, as I said. And a happy birthday again in my family, this time to my nephew. And I know he's not listening because he's on his way to school. Today's a wacky weather day, believe it or not. Kids not home from school yet. Today we're having the very rare early dismissal in anticipation of bad weather later on. Not as bad as you're going to get it up there in, say, Portland, Maine, or elsewhere in the environs. But another snowstorm due here, and we'll see how that affects things going forward. Tomorrow we'll probably have a delayed opening at the minimum as bitter cold settles over pretty much the entire United States, and that naturally last night prompted the idiot president to tweet, how can it possibly be that we are having global warming when it's cold outside right now, or about to be cold anyway. And you know how that goes. I don't know really why anyone thinks it's funny to fall into that trap or purposely put themselves in that trap anymore. And, we tried to express it best we could this morning on the front page with our Daily Coast Radio is live at 9 a.m. post. I can't figure out why he thinks the idea that there's global warming going on, or in fact climate change, is not really impacted by the fact that it is occasionally cold outside. For somebody who drinks as much Diet Coke as he does without ever losing a pound and having to fake his weight at his annual physical, and I believe he's overdue for that already. Wondering about when they're going to get around to that. I don't know why he thinks that works any better than Diet Coke does, but fine, whatever. Moving forward, there's plenty of other stupid things happening that we now have to pay attention to. And, we'll comb through the morning's tweets and today's storehouse of articles from Pocket to see if we can't catch you up. Government back up and running, in a sense, anyway. And people are back at work for the second day. It's been interesting watching people discuss the I guess, at least not widely discussed, if not necessarily unforeseen, information technology, IT problems, going back to work after a month plus out of the office. I happened to see it. Well, the joke that's circulating, or that I am helping circulate anyway, comes from Josh Chaffetz this morning, professor at Cornell Law School, who says, the IT problems are serious because they already tried turning the government off and turning it back on again. That's true. This, though, tweeted in response to something else I saw yesterday from Jeff Carlson, who a writer and photographer, who I am not familiar with, but who nonetheless comes bearing a blue check mark. And so something is supposed to be drawn from that. I'm not certain what. But this tweet yesterday, who passing on a comment from a friend in government that says, so during the furlough, our network passwords expired, I guess because they weren't on the network for more than, I don't know what the expiration date is, 30 days, whatever. Our network passwords expired, so now the entire agency, and I don't know what agency they work for, but just imagine it happening across entire agencies and across almost all agencies, because most of them were closed. Our entire agency is in the IT queue. That's Q-U-E-U-E, Q, not the ITQ, whatever that might mean. But yeah, I guess entire departments are having to reset their passwords, and of course that creates problems for people, and I don't know what they have to, I don't know if it's something they can do by themselves, but the whole department has calls into the IT department. What's happening? How come I can't get into my email? Can you help me reset things? People talking about coming back to thousands and thousands of emails in their inboxes, which is a familiar thing, familiar enough for me. That doesn't bother me. I have tens of thousands of emails unopened in my mailbox on any given day. I tend to use email mostly by way of scanning the subject lines and who the email is from, and deciding what to open and what not to. And the vast majority of stuff just doesn't get open. If it doesn't come from a person that I know, then it tends not to get opened, or at least a person that looks like an actual person that I might not yet know, but might need to know shortly thereafter. But thousands of emails from Facebook or YouTube telling me, hey, look at this video, or so-and-so updated their picture. I don't even bother marking them as new anymore. I've lost track of all that. Anyway, let's see. Here's a comment that Scott Anderson has sent me about the Sicario movie that appears to be the source of all of his racist border rhetoric, including women with tape over their mouths being thrown in cars and smuggled into the country, prayer rugs being found in the desert, and what was the other thing that they... Oh, yes, the supercars that the smugglers have that can beat out all the really terrific, wonderful vehicles that our guys have. But apparently, Scott says that Donald didn't even need to watch the movie. And that's a serious endeavor for Donald to sit down and watch an entire movie. That's a long time for him to stay focused. A movie would probably keep him focused. But apparently he doesn't need to watch the movie. The trailer has enough for him. And I guess you were pointing me to the IMDb Internet Movie Database trailer for Sicario. I mean, I might as well watch it, but then you guys won't be able to see it. But you guys can all take a look at it. Oh, even got the video of it. Is this actually... Oh, no, this isn't even it, because it's an ad that's coming before the actual trailer. So I don't know. I guess it's really not worth trying to play this one online for you. But okay, there it is. Big names in it. Benicio del Toro and Josh Brolin. And a fantastic graphic with a skeleton draped in the flags of both Mexico and the United States, and holding semi-automatic pistols and firing in 90-degree opposite, or 180 degrees in the opposite direction. It's fantastic. Looks like truly good entertainment and a great educational experience. What's the deal with this movie? The little blurb says the drug war on the U.S.-Mexico border, which is not about migration, has escalated as the cartels have begun trafficking terrorists across the U.S. border. To fight the war, federal agent Matt Graver reteams with the Mercurial Alejandro. How do you like that? I guess this is the second in a series, perhaps. I guess that's why Sicario has a subtitle, Day of the Soldado. It is a sequel to, I don't know what, Sicario, you have elected a dotard as idiot president. I don't know what. I didn't see the first one. I didn't see the second one. I might maybe sit through to see it. Oh, there we are. Sicario, the originals from 2015. I might look and see, just because I want to know what else the president might, say is actually happening along the southern border. But if you can just watch the trailer, then I guess it might even be a waste of time for me to watch the whole thing. What's the blurb on the first Sicario? An idealistic FBI agent is enlisted by a government task force to aid in the escalating war against drugs at the border area between the U.S. and Mexico. So it's really about drug smuggling, but I guess he's decided that it's about refugees and asylum seekers more than anything else. Okay, well, that's because he's an idiot. All right, moving on here. Let's see. What other stories have we to share with you? There was a lot that I didn't get to from the Twitter feed yesterday. And let's see. We'll roll some of it back here and see how much of it is relevant to today's show. I guess one thing I'll note is I don't think we've yet picked up on this one, but we happen to be on a really weird losing streak in terms of mass shootings. We've had a bizarre stretch of 5 mass shootings. And remember the definition, apparently, the widely accepted definition of mass shooting, I think is where more than 4 or more people have been shot, whether they are killed or not. So we're on 5 mass shootings over the space of 5 days between Wednesday of last week and Monday, yesterday. We didn't have one a day exactly. There was one day that didn't have one, or didn't have a reported one, and one day that had 2 reported. The latest, of course, involves 5 police officers who were shot in Houston because of all the safety that the new open carry laws have brought. And congratulations to Texas on keeping everyone safe there by distributing more guns everywhere. And yeah, it's absolutely true. And I've been tweeting some of the stories around, and a couple other people have been passing around the collection of stories too. And it just hasn't hit a lot of people that there have been so many. And then apparently it turns out that the vast majority of people who watch the news fairly regularly didn't hear anything about some of the more egregious shootings over the last couple of days, including the one in the was it SunTrust Bank that happened down in Florida, and the State College, Pennsylvania shooting spree. Interestingly, they've almost all involved 5 people shot. I believe one of the 5 shootings actually included 4, besides not counting the victim, 4 people shot and killed. And that, I think, was up in that one in State College. But it's just been a weird stretch. And got a note for the record that, once again, I'm afraid we've become numb to the level of gun violence in the country. And there's not much I can do about that other than to urge you to remind yourself from time to time that these things happen, and they happen a lot. And there's probably some things we can do about that. We'll leave it at that, at least for the moment. All right, let's see. Just scrolling through, there's been so many things that I have retweeted in the last couple of days that I've thought, well, make an interesting point of discussion, and we haven't gotten to it. Here's one. Mike Rosenberg, a Seattle Times reporter, who I guess also works with ProPublica, or at least is publicizing their work in this case, thought this was interesting. He tweeted yesterday about how ProPublica had built a searchable database of political ads on Facebook, where you can also see which demographics are being targeted by those ads, which I thought, and I guess they thought too, and so did Mike, thought was a very valuable service, because it is. Remember, of course, thinking back to the 2016 election and our discussions about, and in discussions in the media about the way Russians allegedly used advertising on Facebook. The Trump campaign people directly used a lot of it. Brad Parscale was a big part of this. Cambridge Analytica, of course, supposedly helping out. But in particular, what was concerning about the way the ads were targeted was the dark targeting, essentially, where you could run outright racist ads and anti-Semitic ads and target them such that mainstream folks who would get angry and offended about the ads and angry and offended at the candidate that was sponsoring such ads was essentially shielded from the ads, which I guess in a way is, I would like, to think, well, they're out there, but somehow I don't have to see all this. But of course, it pays to know that a major party's presidential candidate is paying for explicitly racist and anti-Semitic ads and targeting neo-Nazis with them, right? So I'm sure that's not a demographic that shows up in the list from Facebook, but why not be allowed to see this? I don't know but Facebook appears to know. They changed the code. They changed their code so that this ProPublica database would no longer be able to cull this information. And apparently they view it as proprietary, and I can see their argument for it, but at this point it's had such tremendous influence, or at least has been alleged to have such tremendous influence over American politics, that I am willing to think about overruling their ability to hide that information. I don't know why that would be necessary to hide from people. And I guess they think advertisers would become embarrassed and spend less money advertising if they thought they couldn't target their ads, A, that specifically, and B, without being found out. Although I suspect, sometimes the content of the ads will tell you a little bit about what they think their demographics are too. I don't know. I'm not sure where I would come down on balancing those two things, but there's an article about it, and maybe we can share that and see what we think. Let's see. Facebook moves to block ad transparency tools, including ours. This one by Jeremy Merrill as a special to ProPublica with Ariana Tobin, published yesterday afternoon. So let's see. Facebook moves to block ad transparency tools, including ours. Our tool had let the public see, I wish I had seen it, exactly how users were being targeted by advertisers. The social media giant urged us to shut it down last year, but I guess they have since shut it down for them. A number of organizations, including ProPublica, there are several, have developed tools to let the public see exactly how Facebook users are being targeted by advertisers. Now, Facebook has quietly made changes to its site to stop those efforts. ProPublica Mozilla. And here's an interesting name for an organization. Who Targets Me, which you can find at whotargets.me, I guess, /en, which I think is supposed to be for English. But ProPublica, Mozilla, and Who Targets Me have all noticed their tools stopped working this month after Facebook inserted code in its website that blocks them. This is very concerning, said Senator Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, of course, who has co-sponsored the Honest Ads Act, which would require transparency on Facebook ads. Investigative groups like ProPublica need access to this information in order to track and report on the opaque and frequently deceptive world of online advertising. I think I agree with that. For the past year and a half, ProPublica has been building a searchable database of political ads and the segments of the population advertisers are paying to reach. We did this by enlisting thousands of volunteers who installed a web browser extension. The tool shared the ads users see, as well as Facebook's details on why the users were targeted. In a statement to ProPublica, Facebook said the change was meant to simply enforce its terms of service. The Guardian also published a story on Sunday flagging the change. We regularly improve the ways we prevent unauthorized access by third parties like web browser plugins to keep people's information safe, Facebook spokesperson Beth Gautier said. I don't know how she pronounces Gautier. Gautier, Gautier. This was a routine update and applied to ad blocking and ad scraping plugins, which expose or can expose people's information to bad actors in ways they did not expect, which is interesting because I guess what I don't know whether it's revealing any personal information about the person who owned the account, who set the demographic settings maybe on the ad purchase. I doubt it, but I don't know. I mean, this isn't personal information per se. I don't know exactly what was being revealed. Might possibly have made that information available that yet might not have been included in the database, but I guess if it's available, you want to prevent that from happening. Very strange. Or could be a total lie. There's that too. Facebook has made minor tweaks before that broke our tool, but this time Facebook blocked the ability to automatically pull ad targeting information. The latest move comes a few months after Facebook executives urged ProPublica to shut down its ad transparency project. In August, Facebook Ads product management director Rob Leathern acknowledged ProPublica's project, quote, serves an important purpose. But he said, we're going to start enforcing on the existing terms of service that we have. Oh, now's a good time for that. He said Facebook would soon transition ProPublica away from its tool. That's an interesting euphemism. Facebook has launched an archive of American political ads, which the company says is an alternative to ProPublica's tool, like a company union, I guess. However, Facebook's ad archives is only available in 3 countries, fails to disclose important targeting data, and doesn't even include all political ads run in the U.S. So that's not a very good database, is it? Our tool regularly caught political ads that aren't reflected in Facebook's archive. Just this month, we noticed 4 groups running ads that haven't been in Facebook's archive. The National Rifle Association, maybe you've heard of them, they're large. I think you probably shouldn't miss their ads. An electoral reform advocacy group targeting Bernie Sanders supporters. Not sure from what side or about what. Let's see. I mean, should we take a look at what group that is since we named names on the NRA? Oh, I don't know. I mean, is this going to point me to it, or is this going to be, is this the actual ad, or is this sending me to the whole database? I don't know. Let me click on a few of these. A local anti-corruption ad. Is this just some of the same thing? No, maybe not. I think so. I think this actually shows me the ad they're talking about. So what did we say about the first one? An electoral reform advocacy group targeting Bernie Sanders supporters. Either targeting people who supported him and saying, hey, if you support Bernie, you should support us. Or is it, hey, if you supported Bernie, we hate you and we're targeting you for some bad thing. Let's take a look here. The page in question the ad in question from Equal Citizens. Does anybody know anything about Equal Citizens? Sounds nice. We're going to court to save our democracy, they say. Learn about our plan. It was first seen on January 22nd. Targeting information. One reason you're seeing this ad is Equal Citizens wants to reach people interested in Bernie Sanders based on activities such as liking pages or clicking on ads. 18 and older who live in the United States. It's pretty broad targeting. But pro-Sanders people who will presumably like a group that's named Equal Citizens and about how they're going to court to save our democracy. Sounds nice. Local anti-corruption group is the Brevard, I guess County, Florida, Brevard Corruption Watch. Brevard County, Florida Corruption Citizens Initiative to inform and stop the culture of, I assume, corruption. And, let's see. Targeting people interested in political corruption. Not like, I think I'd like to get into political corruption, but probably to stop it. People 18 and older who live near Merritt Island, Florida. I'm curious what the ad actually is. You never know. I mean, sometimes all the terminology is vague, and sometimes basically whatever the other side that I don't like is doing is corruption. We won't have to dive too deep into what that one is about. A fourth one that ProPublica noticed that Facebook's alternative archive, like you guys need to stop archiving political ads and culling information about their targeting demographics. We know it's valuable. We'll give you the information. Here's one more that they didn't give us. A union advertising to Democrats about healthcare policy. That one was somehow missed. Who was it? SEIU, Michigan, targeting people interested in, Democratic Party in the United States and people 18 and older who live in Michigan. Wide targeting. I don't know why those wouldn't be included in the database, but maybe if Facebook is operating in good faith, they'll want to look into why that happened. Anyway, ProPublica says after we contacted Facebook, the company canceled the ads and said it is investigating why these particular ads weren't classified as political so we can learn and update our protocols. Okay. Journalists in other countries, including those with impending elections like Canada, Ukraine, Guatemala, and Israel, currently have no way to track political ads or targeting information. Facebook announced Monday that it plans to expand its archive to those countries this year and will debut a global tool by the end of June. Facebook's archive doesn't disclose the targeting advertisers do by racial, ethnic, religious, partisan, and other sensitive attributes. Some of those micro-targeting categories have been used to affect the political process. For instance, Russian agents targeted many African Americans during the 2016 election. In an email, Facebook said it doesn't plan to disclose sensitive targeting categories in its archive because doing so, quote, could expose people's information. It didn't elaborate on how that might happen. And it might never happen and might not even be possible. They may just be saying, well, it will expose people's information. What information? Well, if we were forced to answer, the information that they chose to use to target their political advertising. Oh, I thought you meant their name and address or telephone number or email or something like that. Or specific demographic information about themselves, the people who placed the ads. Or anyone, for that matter. And the answer may very well be no, it's information, and we didn't want it to be exposed. And it belongs to people. To who? I don't know, but that's the answer we're giving, and we're sticking with it. Anyway, the proposed Honest Ads Act, which is expected to be reintroduced in Congress this year, because that's the way things work. The bill from last year would have died, right, with the adjournment sine die of the 115th Congress. Well, anyway, the bill would require Facebook to publish a description of the audience targeted by the advertisement. Facebook has also developed another tool that it says will allow researchers to analyze political ads more easily. That tool, called an API, is in beta and restricted to a few participants, including ProPublica, who had to sign a non-disclosure agreement about the data it provided, but not a non-disclosure agreement about the experimental tool itself, I guess. So at least we don't think so. Otherwise, they'd be in big trouble. We'll be back with more of this article and more after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption, though it's still aimed at saying thank you to all of you who are supporters of the show. We've made a lot of progress. When we first started this campaign, fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners were donating to help keep us on the air, and now that's down to about 1 in 15, but we've got a long way to go. Remember, it won't take much. Our average monthly donation is currently about $7. For which you're getting 2 hours of great news and entertainment 5 days a week. What's that, 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. But as a wage, well, I think Democrats would be against that. But if we all put our 70 cents together, or even half of us, that'd really be something. And my kids could go to college. Now, that's not all on you, but remember, patreon.com, Patreon.com, is there to make it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X, or David Waldman, or Kagro in the Morning, or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right there where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your continuing support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's continue, I think we should, with this ProPublica article. Very interesting. Let's see. One researcher with access to, access to who knows what. They don't bother telling you. One researcher with access said the API, there we are, is not sufficient. It only allows searching by keyword, said Laura Edelson, a researcher at New York University, who studies online political advertising. Obviously, she's doing it right now, you see. You can only find ads about things that you already know you're looking for. So any kind of emerging activity is potentially undiscoverable. What it all adds up to, said Knight First Amendment Institute Senior Attorney Alex Abdo, is we cannot trust Facebook to be the gatekeeper to the information the public needs about Facebook. Very interesting. Probably true. Let's see. Here are the details of how our tool worked and what Facebook has done. They go on to report. So those of you who are tech folks will understand some of this. Perhaps the rest of us might not. I don't know. Let's see. All Facebook users can find details about how they're being targeted by clicking through a series of options on the site. It's not easy, I guess. Our tool, the Political Ad Collector, automated the process. Every time one of our over 16,000 participants in crowdsourcing project scrolled past an ad like this one, and they have embedded this one from the NRA. Click here to join the NRA. Free bag. join the NRA. You can put all your guns in it. It looks like a great bag. Anyway, every time you scroll past something like this, our extension automatically captured the text and related picture. It also opened the ellipses on the top right of the ad. Oh, there it is. Which leads to this menu, which is also embedded. And there is a menu, a drop-down menu that says hide ad, report ad, save link, why am I seeing this? Turn on notifications for the post, embed, more options, etc. I guess the why am I seeing this is what we're looking for here. Yeah, from there, it read the information contained in why am I seeing this and copied that to the database as well. Now, if you had seen the, hey, join the NRA and you'll get this free bag, you would have seen it because they were targeting bag lovers, I guess. Let's see. I'm sure that's not a real demographic. I mean, it's out there, but I don't think they're using it. Let's see. One reason you're seeing the ad is the NRA, the National Rifle Association of America, wants to reach people who have visited their website or used one of their apps. This is based on consumer information provided by the NRA. There may be other reasons you're seeing this ad, including that NRA wants to reach people ages 18 and older who live or were recently in the United States. Boy, that's rather broad. This information based on your Facebook profile and where you've connected to the internet. So really, that's all. If you live in the United States and have ever been to the NRA website, even to hate click on it, I guess you'll see this fabulous new bag ad. They should really limit it to bag lovers. And I don't even know how they would get that information. I just figure Facebook has everything. We've collected more than 100,000 political ads this way, the article continues, but Facebook's latest update blocks tools like ours from clicking on the why am I seeing this menu. Guess you have to do it manually now. The company added code that prevents clicks generated by computers, including browser extensions, on just that one button. Interesting. I wonder what their real basis for doing so is. I mean, the information is there, and it's meant to be there, and it's meant to enable anyone who sees an ad to see it. They just want you to have to make an effort to do it. It's, all it is they're trying to hide for the sake of their advertisers. They think their advertisers will be embarrassed by revealing their targeting demographics, and yet, I guess they only want people who have been so targeted to be able to see it, because presumably those people won't be shocked, surprised, or offended to find out that they're a member of this group. Whereas, I guess if other people, if you're collecting information on everything, people who might accidentally, or not accidentally per se, but I guess if you are, like for instance in the case of the NRA ad, if you're a hate clicker on the NRA website, they wouldn't want you to know how, the NRA wouldn't want you to know how they were targeting their ads, especially if it was something that you would, call them out on. But the information is there, and you would be seeing the ad. I guess they just don't want to make it automatic because, like I said, they want to make you work for it. The more people have to work for it, the less people will actually gather the information, even though 16,000 people volunteered to do exactly that. Anyway, very strange. Facebook pointed out that other options besides seeing the explanation for an ad's targeting exist behind that menu, like the ability to hide an ad or report it. So, I don't know, maybe that's the information they say they're trying to prevent from getting out there. We don't want anybody's block list, I don't know, to be out there. Facebook's site does not make such a distinction between user or computer-generated clicks on other behaviors that have been abused by bad actors. For example, it is still possible to automatically like a page, watch a video, or click through on an ad, loopholes exploited by bots and misinformation campaigns attempting to gain credibility or turn a profit. Maybe that has something to do with the fact that the number of watches, likes, or clicks on an ad generates revenue for Facebook, or can be used to generate revenue for Facebook. And that they don't care if they fake it. But there's no money to be made by charging people for the number of times information about the ad was viewed. So they're happy to block that one, I guess. When we asked Facebook why it does not use a similar filtering mechanism on other parts of the platform, it said it prevents bot-like behavior in other ways, including a collaboration with an effort to help take down an ad fraud ring. This is not the first time Facebook has changed its code in a way that has broken our tool. For example, all ads are supposed to contain the word sponsored as a mandatory disclosure, so users can distinguish between ads and their friends' posts. Our tool recognized ads by searching for that word. Last year, Facebook added invisible letters to the HTML code of the site, so to a computer, the word registered as sponsored with a lot of extra capital S's in there. Instead of SPONSORED, it apparently to a computer reads SPSONSSOSREDS. How interesting is that? Later, it also added an invisible sponsored disclosure to posts from your friends. Many of the participants in the project noticed the effects of this change because it caused some menus to pop open unexpectedly or the page to scroll to the top repeatedly. Nowadays, it's an old-fashioned word, nowadays the disclosure says sponsored with lots of S's in there. Some of these changes were likely also intended to thwart ad blockers. Then they include a screen grab of what the changes look like in JavaScript code. That's not going to interest a whole lot of you, but how interesting is that, by the way? They added invisible lettering that puts the word sponsored even in posts that are organic and added by your friends, so that you can't tell the difference between a bot can't tell the difference between sponsored content and organic content. That's very strange. The same new section of code that blocks our tool also sends a log event to Facebook, noting when an ad transparency tool is detected. Facebook says the change is meant to document what % of the traffic was from plugins that identify content without our permission versus Facebook users checking. Why am I seeing this manually? I really don't know. I mean, other than protecting their advertisers from potential embarrassment, there's really no good reason for preventing people from seeing the information on an automated basis that they can see on a manual basis. I don't think, though. I suppose I'd be open to someone's attempt to convince me that it would be very important to keep it manual, if anyone wants to try to make it. All right, let's see. I want to keep scrolling down through the Twitter feed to see what else might be of interest to the rest of us here. And oh yes, here was an interesting discovery that I noticed made yesterday. NYC Southpaw seems to have seen this, and a couple other sharp-eyed folks on Twitter saw this. But in what context was this happening? I don't know. John Bolton, there we are. John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, believe it or not, was photographed for an NBC News story, or at least photographed by news reporters, and that photo used, among others, by NBC News. I guess an AP reporter. Let's see, I'm going to make sure all our auto-playing videos going to stop here. Yeah, Evan Vucci, V-U-C-C-I, is the AP reporter who captured this image. And actually it went along with a piece that I guess was it Stephen Mnuchin was also presenting at whatever press conference this was, and they had this bizarro map behind them. I don't know what it was supposed to illustrate, but everyone was commenting on both the weirdness of the map and then the weirdness of this image of John Bolton, who is standing in front of the map, getting ready to give his briefing, and he's got with him one of those yellow legal pads. And because he's a genius and a super sophisticated national security operator, He is standing there with the pad tucked under his arm, face out, so that everyone who has a photo of him doing this is able to enhance the photo, enlarge the photo, and read what he has written down on the legal pad, which for the National Security Advisor, might be of some interest. People might actually take the time to go ahead and take a look. And there wasn't that much written down either. So seemed like a good thing to do. And lo and behold, it was done. Here, a report by Jonathan Allen tells us that Bolton, the headline is Bolton, who says all options are on the table for Trump in Venezuela. I don't know if we haven't been really discussing the situation there because it's a confusing and strange one, but been in the news the last couple of days. The U.S. announced sanctions Monday against Venezuela's state-owned oil company amid a constitutional power struggle in that nation. And all I can tell you about it is that the elected president in Venezuela was, I don't know what to say. The opposition leader says, based on what, I don't know, that he has ousted this elected president and is instead installing himself as president. And apparently the Trump administration recognizes this opposition leader as the legitimate president of Venezuela. Based on what? I have no idea. Others of you will have an idea because it's been widely reported and widely discussed. I've ignored the issue other than to say, hey, that generally speaking sounds like a bad idea and a bad thing to become involved in. But I've noticed enough that there's some consternation in, every circle, I guess, about whether or not Democrats in general, or at least certain parts of the Democratic Party, ought or ought not somehow to be objecting to the ousting of the president there. Apparently elected, some question, I guess, I'm sure, among his opponents about whether he was duly elected, whether or not he's poorly disposed, let's say, toward the United States, and whether it would be in the national interest to wish that someone else was there versus just force there to be someone else instead. And I have not cleared up the situation, and certainly my description of it hasn't either. I'm like marginally aware of what's happening here. So the article itself, Jonathan Allen writes for NBC News. It's really about the administration's reaction to the story, and I might as well read that so that we can get some information about it on the table there. But the main thrust, I think, of my bringing this up was this picture of Bolton with his notes facing outward. People enlarged it, and golly, you'll never guess what it says, and among other things. The first line was about Afghanistan, welcoming talks with the Taliban in Afghanistan, which is not a total surprise by any means, although it is unusual to find supposedly Republican administration saying such things. But the second line was what got everyone's attention. 5,000 troops to Colombia. Like it's a shopping list for Bolton. I can't tell from the notes whether that's Bolton suggesting that to Trump or whether Trump said, I want to send 5,000 troops to Colombia. Either do it or check it out and tell me what you think. But caught most people by surprise that we would be contemplating sending 5,000 troops to Colombia. Well, here's the story Jonathan Allen wrote up for NBC News. President Donald Trump is leaving open the possibility of a U.S. military intervention to protect opposition leader Juan Guaido. I'm sorry, I didn't see the accent mark there. Guaido. The members of the nation's assembly and American diplomatic personnel, National Security Advisor John Bolton said Monday. The president has made it clear that all options are on the table, Bolton told reporters in the White House briefing room. Venezuela's government is embroiled in a power struggle after Guaido declared President Nicolas Maduro illegitimate last week under a provision of the nation's constitution. Interesting. The Trump administration has recognized Guaido as the leader of the country. And, well, gee whiz, I don't know anything about the people, but I do know this. If Donald Trump is recognizing you as the leader, I would have my suspicions. However, occasionally, I also believe that there are plenty of things that Donald Trump might do at the behest of his national security advisor without any real idea what's going on there, which is not good. And John Bolton is also somebody you should absolutely never trust judgment with. But there's also, a long tradition of American government rejecting the elected government of Latin American countries and thinking it's the right thing to do. And I don't know whether it's always the case that one side in the United States thinks it's the right thing to do and the other side always thinks that it's not. So I don't know where to be reflexively. We're going to have to explore the situation and figure this out. Bolton and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, who also appeared at the briefing, announced that the U.S. would impose new sanctions on PDVSA, Venezuela's state-owned oil company, as a means of putting more pressure on Maduro's regime. But it isn't his regime. It's the other guy's regime now. Anyway, whatever. We also today call on the Venezuelan military and security forces, to accept the peaceful, democratic, and constitutional transfer of power, Bolton said. And I guess that comes in under the fig leaf of if Guaido used a provision of the national constitution to oust Maduro, then I guess you get to make the claim that we're hoping that the Venezuelan military and security forces accept the peaceful, democratic, and constitutional transfer of power away from the person who got elected to the person who didn't. I don't know. I don't get it. I don't know anything about the Venezuelan constitution, I must say. Maduro has so far refused to schedule new elections to resolve the dispute over who is the legitimate leader of the country. This is, for the fact that as far as it goes as a story about what John Bolton and Steve Mnuchin did yesterday, I guess it's okay. Maybe the coverage of what's happening in Venezuela is elsewhere in the NBC News vertical, but I don't know. And I haven't searched for it. It's my own fault, but I was rather amazed, really, and mostly interested in the story by the fact that idiot John Bolton has left his notes exposed there like that. Okay, so that seems kind of dumb. Much talk yesterday over the entry of Howard Schultz into the presidential race, if you want to acknowledge it as such. I don't. And if you're an independent candidate for president, then there's no reason to pay attention to you right now, this far in advance of the campaign. There's barely reason to pay attention to people who will be competing in contested primaries at this point. But if you're running as an independent, I don't need to hear from you for another year or so. Please come back later. Thank you very much. Even though, really, honestly, I don't really want you to come back at all. All right. Let's see. What else is happening here that deserves specific mention? I don't know. We'll have to keep scrolling back, and maybe we will hit upon something that requires discussion. First, though, we'll switch back over to Pocket, much more specifically targeted for these purposes. Let's see. The interesting article I picked up on today from Politico. Well, I picked it up yesterday, actually. Or it was written yesterday. I picked it up today. Now I'm straight on this. Republicans may block Trump from another shutdown. That sounds likely and worth at least a little bit of our time. The Senate GOP has no appetite, it says here, for another political debacle and is pushing Trump away from closing the government again. The Trump administration spent much of yesterday warning everybody that it was spoiling for perhaps another government shutdown. Burgess Everett, John Bresnahan, Sarah Ferris on the byline here for Politico. Am I looking at the AMP version of it? Yeah, it's very oddly formatted and looks like it will cause trouble if we leave it at that. I would love to have no AMP versions in Pocket. It's too bad so many online operators serve up their content on mobile platforms only through AMP. And it makes it much more difficult to put articles away if you weed it out ahead of time. There's just so much more work involved. All right, let's see what they have to say about what Republicans in the Senate are doing. Senate Republicans can't stomach another shutdown. That's good. After weathering 35 days of a partial government closure, the Senate GOP is dreading the possibility of another one, I guess, will hit in less than 3 weeks, a sentiment that could prevent President Donald Trump from closing the government again. Though House Republicans aren't ruling out supporting the president, should he choose another confrontation over his border wall, the Republican Senate majority, which actually has governing power, has another view. I did not love the shutdown. I wouldn't think anybody would have another shutdown, said Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri, one of the key negotiators trying to strike a deal on border security. Most GOP lawmakers dutifully stuck with Trump in public as the partial government shutdown dragged on, but privately, Republican support began to crack as their polling and the economy both suffered. Their polling suffered. I'm aghast. After a half-dozen GOP senators defected last week, Trump dropped his demands for border wall money before a full-scale revolt unfolded. There is broad recognition within the administration, including on the president's part, that shutting down the government is not an effective strategy for extracting concessions, according to White House aides. But while White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, I'm getting really sick of, said Monday that Trump doesn't want to go through another shutdown, she declined to rule it out if Congress doesn't come up with a border security plan to Trump's liking. Neither did House Freedom Caucus Chairman Mark Meadows, a close Trump confidant. The prospect of a second shutdown, after the longest one in history, is something Senate Republicans still take seriously, despite rising hopes it can be avoided with a bipartisan border deal or even some sort of executive action by the president. Asked how seriously she is taking the potential for another funding debacle, Senator Lisa Murkowski replied, "Very. I want to be able to say that, no, it's not possible that we could go back into another shutdown. But I didn't think the first one that was 35 days was possible either," she said. Senators are already making calls to gauge what their fellow conference committee members might support ahead of their first meeting Wednesday. And Republicans writ large are touting the panel as a possible solution for the problem. But if that committee fails, what committee? Oh, conference committee. I see. Fellow conference committee members. If that committee fails, as many on the Hill privately believe is likely, Trump has touted two paths to again try to build his wall: a shutdown or a national emergency on the border. The preferred manner of going forward would be some type of executive action versus shutdown, but that doesn't mean that shutdown is off the table, said Meadows, who helped push Trump to shut down the government in the first place. So is a dummy. Senate Republicans loathe both options, but for now, they'd choose almost anything over another funding lapse. As Senator Mitt Romney, remember that guy, of Utah, put it, "I don't think we want to face another shutdown, and I certainly don't think we want to have emergency action taken, so the president and Congress will have to come together." And yet, they likely won't. It goes almost without saying that shutdowns are a very bad idea, and we should not use them as a political weapon, Romney added, as he enjoyed his first day in the Senate with the government fully open. There's a lot of lessons learned, just like I learned in 1995 when I thought it was a good thing to shut down the government, said Chuck Grassley. See, he, along with Newt Gingrich, thought it was a genuinely good thing. Well, anyway, he's the most senior Republican senator. And when he says it, I guess you're supposed to take that seriously. Government's a service for people of this country, and they can't be served when the government is not functioning. The Republican retreat from the border wall confrontation was evident on Monday, not just among the rank and file. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell barely mentioned the standoff over the border, other than to ding Democrats for voting against a Middle East policy bill during the shutdown. It seems few Republicans had any desire to rehash the episode. There's little or no appetite for it, said Senator Susan Collins. Those who thought that shutdowns were a good idea have been disabused by that. Some Republican centrists are even suggesting that a bipartisan border agreement could withstand a veto threat. Actually talking override, huh? I think the committee will come up with a deal. If they come up with something that isn't crazy, I think it'll have enough votes to override a veto in the House and the Senate, said Mike Simpson of Idaho on Monday. Simpson is among the at least two House Republicans who have drafted their own long-shot funding plans ready to be unveiled in case border security talks collapse again. If they're only unveiled at that point, though, I don't know how much chance they have of actually winning. But because we've all learned, hopefully, that shutdowns don't work and they're stupid. But even as some Republicans look to use their influence with Trump to nudge him away from another self-destructive shutdown, others are just as queasy about being at odds with the president. Take Senator Joni Ernst, please, who is up for re-election in 2020 and could face a tough Democratic challenge. She disliked the shutdown and said it made everyone in Congress look bad, but she was not among those thinking about bolting from Trump's position last week before the president himself caved. We need to work with the president, Ernst said on Monday. We need to have border security. That's so specific and helpful. Ernst's view is even more broadly shared in the House, where following a House GOP leadership meeting on Monday, senior Republican lawmakers claimed they were ready for another shutdown if Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer don't give in on a border wall. They're still trying to do this. Joni Ernst, of course, earning no points with anybody lately, no matter what subject she opens her mouth on. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And let's sum things up here with this particular Politico article. I just wanted to comb through it and see if we can get the comments of a couple more members on record and get an idea of who stands where in which body and see if we can figure out how this thing will come out. I don't think many people were moved in this shutdown on the right or on the left, added Representative Patrick McHenry of North Carolina. Everyone felt justified in their position, and there's not a great deal of learning that occurred. Representative Kay Granger of Texas, top Republican on the Appropriations Committee, said Trump shouldn't take a shutdown off the table at this point. Maybe moving forward after this, but not right now, Granger said, which makes me think that she's thinking in terms of, well, no one wants the shutdown, so the threat of it will be grave enough to move people toward compromise. Whether that's realistic or not, I don't know. Doesn't sound like it. But what it does sound like is a bluff. Keeping a shutdown on the table only insofar as the threat of it being there is supposed to frighten people into seeking compromise. Whether or not it's really working or not, or whether or not it could possibly represent a real threat if you know that the other side is only putting it out there as a threat and as much a threat to themselves as it is to you, I don't know how effective it is. Among hardline conservative Republicans who urged Trump to use a shutdown to pressure Democrats, there is no doubt what the president should do, keep the pressure on Democrats to deal. And if they don't, then Trump can consider declaring a national emergency or some other option. And you notice that they don't list the shutdown among them. We've got 3 weeks here to see what we can work out, said House GOP Conference Chairwoman, I love saying GOP instead of GOP, Liz Cheney. Boo. I think everybody would like to be able to work something out, but it's going to depend on the Democrats. I see. Well, they're the majority. I don't understand why they're talking to only Republicans in all this. And it is interesting. I mean, I guess this is the fascinating part about this, that Politico is bothering to, I mean, it's like they missed the House control changing over here. They're talking to Republicans who are giving them comments as though they were still in the majority when they're not. It's very weird. How many Democrats have been quoted here? Just let me scroll up to I mean, there have been some, right? But not nearly as many. Oh, let's see. Okay, our first quote is from Roy Blunt. Oh, I mean, it is a Republican. Republicans may block Trump from another shutdown. So I guess it stands to reason that they'd only be talking to Republicans. Well, anyway, it looks like the House Republicans, as they report, are not ready to give up on shutdown as a tactic. But it is funny how they're putting the point. Well, it's really up to Democrats, and will they go along? And it's not a matter of them going along with you. They're in the majority. You need to find a way to go along with them. I don't know. Very odd. But I guess they haven't gotten used to it. And, of course, it's not entirely clear that Democrats are in the driver's seat because it's not the case in the Senate. But in the House, the dynamics in the House are very different. I don't know why they don't acknowledge it. Let's see. If a second shutdown is truly looming, Representative Tom Reed of New York, also Republican, said Congress should pass stopgap funding bills every day to protect federal workers while keeping the pressure on Congress to strike a deal. I hope that is the case, and people have learned the lesson not to do this, that nobody wins in a shutdown, Reed said, referring to the short-term funding bill that Trump signed on Friday. I guess his idea is literally passing a one-day CR each day, which, eats up the bulk of the day and makes it difficult for people to actually negotiate. So you could go to a week or 2 weeks at a time, certainly. If the negotiations off the floor are particularly productive anyway. Interesting point of view. I don't think anybody's going to agree with him on doing it day to day, though. Representative Rodney Davis, Republican of Illinois, was among the few Republicans to support Democratic funding bills to reopen the government this month, acknowledged that nobody wants another shutdown. But he said Democrats, specifically Pelosi, would take the heat this time if the border security talks collapsed, despite polls consistently showing the public sided with Democrats. It's on them. They're the ones who said reopen the government because we'll come and tell you what we want, Davis said. Republicans and the president moved. They did what the speaker asked. McHenry warned not to read too much into polls showing Trump was hurt by the shutdown. So to say that is going to have some lasting impact is not commensurate with the last 2 years of experience. Senate Republicans would disagree. They face a more difficult Senate map in 2020 than they did last year and could be dragged into the minority if Trump's popularity collapses. And if in 2 weeks the conference committee isn't going anywhere, they're the ones that will have to put a bill on the floor to fund the government and potentially shirk Trump's demands for the wall. All right, so I guess that gives us some idea of where we stand in all of this. It's just, I don't know. It's pretty amazing. It worries me a little bit that Republicans don't seem yet to understand or acknowledge that they're not the ones driving this, really. Okay. Let's head back over to Pocket. There's still more from Politico, which sucks, but that's what we've got. Bringing up a point that I didn't get a chance to make yesterday, and also giving us a chance to look at Venezuela one more time, but noting that Elliott Abrams, for real, Elliott Abrams is back in a Republican government again. And the point I really wanted to make with Elliott Abrams the other day was, for those of you for whom his name rings a bell, obviously it's disconcerting to have him back in government at all and have him back in the capacity of special envoy for Venezuela for President Trump is particularly disturbing. And I guess I wanted to at least bring up my initial reaction to his being named to the post over the weekend, which is to say, Elliot Abrams was already on the list of people that you really shouldn't be dealing with. I guess what I took the tweet announcing that Mike Pompeo had just named. I guess it was Pompeo that makes the appointment rather than the president, but I'm sure I'm not sure that it's at the direction of the president, because the president up until this last week didn't want anything to do with Elliot Abrams. Elliot Abrams hadn't successfully made it back into a Republican administration because Trump blocked him, because he had made negative comments about Trump during the campaign, which is amazing. It doesn't make me praise Elliot Abrams in the least, but it's interesting to note. And now it's been overridden as Mike Pompeo names him new special envoy for Venezuela. And then reminding everybody, as this John Hudson tweet did, that Abrams pled guilty to withholding information from Congress about the Iran-Contra affair. That's how he became infamous in most circles. And he's a bad actor. And I was saying over the weekend, this is why you impeach bad actors like Abrams. And even if they've left office, you can bar them, remember, from future federal service. That's important. And I bring it up again because Elliot Abrams was already my example for this point in the George W. Bush administration. It was already back in government, unbelievably, against all common sense. Somebody who had committed criminal and impeachable offenses in the Reagan, George H.W. Bush era, had no business coming back into federal government service in the George W. Bush administration, let alone the Donald Trump administration. This is somebody who should have been barred from federal service 30 years ago and wasn't. So, yet here we are. I just thought that was rather amazing. Let's take a quick scan of the Politico piece to see if there's any interesting information that can be culled from it. Nahal Tusi, writing this one for Politico, Elliot Abrams, a controversial neoconservative figure who was entangled in the Iran-Contra affair. Just entangled. He was just around, hanging out. Has been named as a Trump administration special envoy overseeing policy toward Venezuela, which has been rocked by a leadership crisis. Yes. Abrams' appointment, announced Friday by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, was something of a surprise. President Donald Trump nixed his 2017 bid to be Deputy Secretary of State after learning that Abrams had criticized him. Abrams will now be one of several special envoys Pompeo has brought on board to tackle thorny issues. Please help me do my job. He takes on his role at an unusually volatile time in U.S.-Venezuelan relations. Earlier this week, of course, Trump announced that he no longer recognized the legitimacy of the Venezuelan regime of Nicolás Maduro and said the U.S. now considers opposition leader Juan Guaido to be the country's interim president, or acting president, as we like to say here. But Maduro refuses to leave power and has declared that Venezuela will cut off diplomatic ties with the United States. The crisis in Venezuela is deep and difficult and dangerous, and I can't wait to get to work on it, Abrams said in brief remarks to reporters. Abrams, who served in the Reagan and George W. Bush administrations, is a well-known and somewhat controversial figure in U.S. foreign policy circles. He has often expressed hawkish views and is fiercely pro-Israel, but he also has written and spoken eloquently, it says here anyway, about the need to support human rights around the world, which sounds like garbage coming from him, of course. Let's see. Abrams was Deputy National Security Advisor in the George W. Bush administration and was instrumental in Middle East policy at the time, including supporting the U.S. invasion of Iraq. There were also allegations that he supported a military coup attempt in Venezuela in 2002, damaging the U.S. relationship with the government there after the plot ultimately failed. Abrams held multiple positions at the State Department under President Ronald Reagan, including Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs. He was also one of the Reagan administration's fiercest advocates of armed support for Nicaraguan rebels, and thus became caught up in the Iran-Contra scandal. In 1991, he pleaded guilty to 2 misdemeanor counts of withholding information from Congress about secret efforts to aid the rebels. President George H.W. Bush pardoned him the next year. Abrams is one of very few people who were critical of Trump during the 2016 campaign and yet have been allowed to join the Republican administration. Another, James Jeffrey, is a special envoy dealing with Syria policy. Pompeo on Friday spoke warmly of Abrams, saying he will be a true asset to our mission to help the Venezuelan people fully restore democracy and prosperity to their country. Abrams, who in recent years has been at the Council on Foreign Relations think tank, noted the timing of his return to the State Department. I left this building 30 years ago this week, last time I worked there, so it's very nice to be back, he said. Shouldn't have happened, and could have been prevented very easily had we done what was necessary the first time around, rather than saying, wow, we've been spared the need to do this, and ought not we to ignore it from here on for the good of the country and for our political healing. Okay, I don't think so. All right, next on the list, the piece from Talking Points Memo pointing out that, as the headline says here, Trump asks appeals court to consider how great his hotels are. What could that possibly be about? Well, Josh Kovensky tells us over at TPM it's about the still ongoing emoluments lawsuits. Facing a lawsuit claiming that he is violating the Constitution's emoluments clause by remaining financially linked to his Washington, D.C. hotel, President Trump argued last week that there are many reasons why foreign governments and lobbyists would want to stay at his hotel. In other words, it can't be an emolument if they're just buying fantastic service from me. It's just a fee for service, not an emolument. Not that the emoluments clause makes any distinction between the two, but there you have it. That's going to be his argument. Trump's lawyers wrote a brief filed in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals that there's no way to prove that a foreign official looking to curry favor with the White House would stay at a Trump Organization hotel or property simply because the president might receive some part of the profits. In other words, it's their argument that there could be totally legitimate reasons to pay the president. However, the answer to that is the emoluments clause doesn't care. The emoluments clause demands that the payments not be permitted under any circumstances because of the possibility that they could be perceived to have influenced the president. It doesn't require that the influence be proven. It merely requires that, well, it doesn't require anything. I mean, I guess the Congress could affirmatively approve it even if it was meant to influence the president, I guess. But the reason that they're silent on it, I would say, is because they don't want the appearance of a president being under foreign influence. And so, therefore, the payments are not forbidden per se, but require congressional approval. And he hasn't gotten it. There hasn't been any indication that they're ready to disapprove it to this point, except now, of course, the House of Representatives would almost certainly disapprove of it. I don't know what the Senate in Republican hands would do, but the fact that Democrats in the House would be able to prevent the Congress as a whole from affirmatively okaying it tells you all you need to know. Congress will never approve, well, this Congress will never approve of those payments going into Trump's pocket. And so it remains a violation of the emoluments clause. It doesn't really matter why a foreign entity would make that payment or whether they have some other motive or not. What matters is it could be this motive, and that's all there is to it. So there you go. Trump's lawyers are saying you can't prove that foreign entities and foreign officials aren't staying in the hotels because they're awesome, not because the president gets a share of the profits. Attorneys for the president laid out what they feel, what feels like an advertising pitch for the Trump hotel chain. Riley giving other reasons why a foreign official might want to stay at a Trump property. And here's some quotes from the brief. Not because the hotel provides better accommodations, not because the hotel is located conveniently in the heart of D.C., not because the officials simply like the president, enjoy BLT Prime, prefer the Trump brand, admire the old post office building, or a host of other idiosyncratic reasons, the brief reads. It's interesting. If you read it correctly with the punctuation, it's some of the reasons might include because the officials simply like the president. And I guess that is how it's punctuated. I like the president, so I'm staying in his hotel. I enjoy BLT Prime, the steakhouse there, and so I'm staying there. I thought they were saying not because officials like the president, as the president does, enjoy BLT Prime. But no, they really do mean they actually just I like the president. I'm going to pay to stay in his hotel and admire the Trump brand. Interesting. Again, none of that has any bearing on whether or not he's violating the emoluments clause. He is, and it doesn't matter why they want him to violate it. He's violating it. That's just I don't even really know that there's any relevance to it at all. I think I just said that earlier, but now I now realize how irrelevant their point of view really is. Not only is it supposed to help force a president to avoid even the appearance of impropriety, it also just wouldn't bear on the impropriety of the emoluments what the state of mind of the person paying for the hotel room was. It wouldn't matter whether you liked the president or hated the president. If you were paying the president, that's not going to fly under a normal person's interpretation of the emoluments clause. It's just doubly irrelevant to the question. All right. Well, anyway, Trump's lawyers made the argument while asking the panel of judges to mull whether to throw out a lawsuit filed by Maryland and Washington, D.C. attorneys general against Trump in his personal and not official capacity. Interesting. For Trump, the distinction between suing him in his personal capacity versus his official capacity is both crucial and relatively rare in the annals of civil lawsuits against federal employees. If allowed to proceed, the case will test claims against Trump as an individual, meaning that he would be personally liable for whatever damages emerge from the case and not the federal government. And I can see why you would obviously want him to be the one that bears the costs of the case and not the federal government. He, of course, doesn't want to pay for anything. Even if he wins, he wouldn't want to pay for his defense. He would want the government to pay for that. But you can't really allow him the opportunity to break the law at government expense and defend himself at government expense as well. I mean, this is clearly his own doing. He's not doing it for any official reason. The lower court case was halted in December after the Fourth Circuit took up an appeal regarding the portion of the lawsuit filed against Trump as an individual and an appeal from the DOJ, which filed a writ of mandamus, essentially suing the lower court judge for allowing discovery to proceed in the case. Wow. On January 24th, the January 24th filing discloses some details about the almost 40 subpoenas filed for discovery in the case. Trump's lawyers write that the state attorneys general sought the identity of every guest who had stayed at the hotel or spent money there, the amount that was spent, marketing and other communications between the hotel and potential customers, and the distribution of revenues within the Trump organization and its affiliates. That's how you would make a complete case. Trump's lawyers go on to argue in favor of a narrower definition of emolument than that proposed by the state attorneys general, which was approved by the district court. According to the president's lawyers, an emolument should be payment and compensation for personal services performed through official acts or in employment-type relationships. Effectively, a payment made in exchange for an act taken as president. In other words, you have to prove that there was bribery involved in order for it to be an emolument, I guess. Which, again, is counter to the point of having the clause in the first place, to avoid the appearance of impropriety. The brief also mentions examples from past presidents, returning to cite the Mount Vernon tourist portal as saying that, quote, Washington operated a grist mill during his presidency that exported flour and cornmeal to England, Portugal, and the island of Jamaica. So I guess the claim there being that perhaps in those days under the mercantile system that you could make the claim that exporting flour and cornmeal to England, Portugal, and Jamaica was the same thing as selling it to the sovereign of England or Portugal. And that's a bit of a stretch, but I guess at the time you might have been able to make that argument. Trump's attorneys move on to more recent examples of presidents having business interests that generate foreign profits, arguing that there's no way to draw a line between the Trump hotels, the founders' plantations, and Obama's book sales. Royalties on foreign book sales received by President Obama while in office would violate the emoluments clause if a foreign state-owned university bought the book, the brief reads. At least they recognize that there would be a more difficult thing to establish than the mercantile relationships of the 1700s, and I don't even know if they're really giving proper thought to that. And it might not even really be true. A separate appeal in the Fourth Circuit was filed by the DOJ, acting for Trump as a government official. Those proceedings will review a separate claim that the Fourth Circuit should step in and halt the case before resolution because the discovery process would deal unnecessary damage to Trump. That's a weird way of putting things. Deal unnecessary damage. Okay. Well, would be extraordinarily dangerous, I think, to establish the idea that you had to prove a quid pro quo and a bribery for policy purposes in order to prove that it was an illegal emolument. At that point, you just have them on bribery, and it's an impeachable offense, as it says right in the Constitution. It lists bribery as impeachable, and well, at least there we'd have no contest anymore, and we wouldn't be. Maybe it's a blessing in disguise. Wouldn't that be something if somehow the Fourth Circuit thought that they were protecting him by saying, yeah, you're going to have to prove essentially that there was a quid pro quo and intent on the part of the people paying the money such that it was outright bribery after all, at which point you say, oh, well, bribery is one of the enumerated bases for a valid impeachment. So I guess we don't have to wait for the Mueller report anymore. We can impeach him on the bribery charges alone, and we might as well get started on that one. Thanks, Fourth Circuit. I guess that's one interesting outcome we could have from your case. Although, quite honestly, I think you'd do everybody a bigger favor by saying, yeah, I mean, were there not counterexamples given? I don't know whether. Ordinarily, you have a responsibility in briefing the court to include contrary authority, and surely then you would want to have made mention of the fact that Jimmy Carter was apparently forced to sell his peanut farm, lest he stand accused one day of allowing a foreign government to buy peanuts from his peanut farm. Or what if the peanuts were purchased by a student lounge at a university-funded student lounge at a foreign university supported by the state? Oh my, see, anything could happen. And of course it would have to be at a bar, because who else buys peanuts? That's absolutely the case. Okay, wow. All right, a new break coming up here, our last one, and we'll see what else we have to dig out of the archives and share with you in the last half hour of the show. But but this gives us a 2-minute break to parse through those things still outstanding here. And I can see already a few things popping up, and we'll check back in on the hashtag and see if we can relay any important comments from the listeners along the way here. We'll be back after 2 minutes to catch your breath and reorganize for the last 30 minutes ahead. We'll be right back. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. We got a couple more stories to run through here, and wow, I'm not certain exactly where to start with this one. Let's go way back, though. Way back, like, oh wow, gee whiz, over 10 days. The distant past. Something that will probably come up again, and maybe it makes a good segue off of the idea of a lawsuit over emoluments. Because, of course, Trump is the target of the suit, and I guess a similar issue arises here in this Atlantic article from Emma Green, dated January 16th. Wow, it's like practically ancient. January 16th, 2019. There's a way for Democrats to sue Trump, thanks to the Republicans. Intriguing? Let's find out what it's about. A lawsuit to block the border wall. And remember that if he were to declare a national emergency and attempt to construct the border wall that way, we already anticipate that it would end up in court. It's just that this article now alleges it could end up in court under or with a unique and interesting procedural posture. The term of art, I guess, used by law school students anyway, if not lawyers themselves, to describe the unique circumstances of how a case comes before the court. Who's the plaintiff and who's the defendant, and is there standing, and what are the questions being asked here, and at what stage in the procedures we're at here, either initial suit in before a district court, the finder of fact, or are we at an appellate stage here and arguing a pure question of law, et cetera, et cetera. That's what procedural posture describes. Anyway, a lawsuit to block the border wall could go the route the House GOP took in 2014 to challenge Obamacare. It is explained herein as the partial shutdown of the federal government has stretched to 25 days, and of course it went even further than that. Democrats are mulling a possible lawsuit, not just because we're in shutdown. If Donald Trump declares a national emergency and reappropriates funding for his proposed border wall from other departments, as he has suggested he might do, they would almost certainly challenge that action in court. Look, an emergency cannot be whatever a president says an emergency is. Jamie Raskin, a former law professor and a representative from Maryland, told the Washington Post, "If there is a legal question about Trump's next steps," he said, "we're very happy to relocate it from the halls of Congress into the courts. And if Democrats decide they want to sue Trump over his border wall, they may have a novel option, courtesy of their Republican colleagues. The GOP's 2014 lawsuit against then-President Barack Obama was the first time a district court judge affirmed the right of the House of Representatives as an institution to sue a sitting president. In the midst of this impasse, that suit could serve as a model for Democrats as Congress once again turns to the courts to help it get out of the work of governing. That's an interesting way of putting it. But yeah, you'll recall that probably prior to this ruling in 2014, probably a lot of people wondered whether the courts might deny standing to the House of Representatives to file such a suit, even though it does make a certain amount of sense to allow it. It just typically hadn't been allowed in very many instances prior to this. But now that we have one in recent memory and on an important and high-profile piece of legislation at that, I guess the door's open. If it was good for the goose, then, as they say, it should also be good for the gander. The current budget standoff could end in a few different ways, and so far we have a temporary ending for it, right? Which would determine the future of any potential lawsuits. Congress could make a deal with Trump, pass a budget, and get his signature on the legislation. Congress could also pass a budget without Trump, but then it would have to override his veto, which would require the unlikely cooperation of Senate Republicans. As long as Congress is still trying to work out a deal, courts have little role to play. They can't just say, "Hey, open the government," said Susan Block, a law professor at Georgetown University. Alternatively, Trump could follow through on a suggestion he has been publicly toying with for several weeks. He could declare the alleged crisis at the border a national emergency and use that as a premise to direct money from existing budgets to the wall. This is the scenario in which a lawsuit by House Democrats would become relevant. They could claim the president was violating the House's authority to make appropriations under Article 1 of the Constitution. This kind of move does not have much precedent. Courts are loath to be pulled into these types of political standoffs, said Jonathan Turley, and it's probably still mostly true. Was true in 2014, still mostly true, and still mostly true in a way that could end up looking extraordinarily unfair, because it was, probably. I don't remember specifically the strength of the 2014 ruling. I think it probably came as something of a surprise to most people. Seeing it stand as precedent now would be ironic, to say the least, but I don't know if it would be out of keeping. I mean, it's there, and if you want to, impart the lesson to the judiciary that partisan rulings like this are unwise, one of the better ways of doing it is to have it, revisited in a negative way on a Republican president. But by the time it comes up again, most of the judges that learned that lesson will be long gone. Anyway, ordinarily, as we said, courts are loath to be pulled into these types of political standoffs. Jonathan Turley saying this. And if you're ever wondering, why do we keep hearing his name? Law professor at George Washington University, of course, right here in D.C., and so easy to get him on television. Susan Block could be on television a lot more, too, but I guess she puts more of her time into teaching. I don't know. I have heard her name a couple of times. I hear about her a lot in these articles, in the D.C. papers in particular. Anyway, you have two parties who are playing a rather dangerous game of chicken, Turley said. In 2014, however, with Turley's help, the GOP-held House of Representatives sued Obama for using government money to subsidize health care costs under the Affordable Care Act without an appropriation from Congress. Obama, Republicans argued, had violated the House's rights under Article 1. And I guess at that point, Jonathan Turley was only too eager to help. How interesting that he now reminds us that courts are loath to be pulled into these types of political standoffs. But he's managed to make it happen before. In theory, judges try to avoid situations where they appear to be refereeing partisan fights. I don't know if that's really the theory, but no fight could be more bitter than one in which members of one branch of the federal government sue the head of another. Despite this norm of reluctance, a district court judge sided with Republicans in House v. Burwell. So it has happened. I think what they're looking to avoid refereeing is fights between elected branches, or in other words, being asked to settle fights between irresistible forces and immovable objects. They basically like to default and say this should be settled at the ballot box. But on occasion, they are moved to, I guess, say no, that in fact we're going to have to settle that one ourselves. All right. The big question in the case was whether the House had standing or the right to bring this case against the president. Rosemary Collyer, a D.C. District Court judge, said yes. Although the substance of the Obamacare case was eventually resolved through a settlement agreement and Collier's decision wouldn't be binding on future judges, it showed that legislators have a chance of success in suing the president, or at least in using a lawsuit to slow down the president. This is the most important question, said Sai Krishna Prakash, a law professor at the University of Virginia. If they sued, would they be able to get an injunction telling him not to spend the money? In effect, this would be a way of getting around the work of politics. Unable to negotiate a deal themselves, the Democrats would be looking to the courts to stop Trump. There's a reason legal action looks attractive in a standoff such as this, said Prakash. Of the three branches, the courts are held in highest esteem. Oh, it's a dangerous assumption. Having a court say that you're right or wrong does seem to end the discussion, he said. It's not uncommon for politicians to think the court's job is to sort these things out. A bet on the courts is still risky. Democrats could easily get a judge less sympathetic to their case for standing, and they could very well lose on the merits of the argument. In recent weeks, a number of House Democrats have confidently told reporters and cable TV anchors that Trump would be on shaky legal ground if he declared a national emergency, but that's, quote, just bravado, Prakash said. Most of them don't know anything about these statutes, even if they wrote it. Probably what they mean is that some staff member put it together. And that's a valid point. True. That does tend to happen. On the other hand, courts, as part of their deference to the elected branches, sometimes like to act as though they believe that the members of Congress are the ultimate authorities on what those statutes meant. Congressional intent is extraordinarily important in many cases, not always, and sometimes people, well, when it gets in their way, judges like to, and justices like to throw it out the window and simply say, you know, the four corners of the document, the bill that passed here is what's truly important, and that legislative intent, especially if it is documented only in committee reports that accompany the legislation, can't be of any interest to us. It depends basically on what you want the outcome to be. It's a political decision, as Armando would tell you, and they pay attention to legislative intent or discard it as necessary for their preferred outcomes. That's just true. All right. So, where do we leave off here? Oh, yes. There's a risk for House Democrats also in suing Trump. A failed suit could undermine the fragile legal theory that the House has standing to sue the president in certain cases. Democrats should use this tool, Turley said, only as a matter of last resort, as he did on behalf of Republicans. Lawsuits can seem serious and meaningful even when they're not. So for Democrats who have a vested interest in battling Trump by any means, a lawsuit could be an attractive path. One way to think about litigation in this context is that it's a continuation of politics by other means, says Prakash. Ultimately, though, this proliferation of lawsuits could obscure the real problem behind the border wall impasse. Congress has failed to do one of its main jobs, which is to pass a budget. It's a dereliction of duty for the Senate leader, Mitch McConnell, to say, I'm not going to put something to a vote unless I know the president agrees, said Block. That's an interesting twist. I mean, it's true. I didn't realize we were going back there. The process just doesn't work if the Senate just takes its orders from the president. It's supposed to be a check on the president, not subservient. I think she means subservience. in this way. But fundamentally, a lawsuit aimed at breaking the current impasse and reopening the government would signal a multi-level breakdown in the balance of powers. The executive branch is dictating the actions of the legislature. The legislative branch may look to the judiciary to solve its problems. For its part, however, the judiciary generally does not want any part of this. The situation changes only slightly if we are not at an impasse at the time that the suit is filed anyway, and that the government is open, but the president is declaring an emergency anyway. I mean, I guess if we get to that situation that we're still talking about, where the president would allow the government to reopen because he has issued some sort of order reallocating funds and declaring a national emergency and therefore reallocating funds to the border wall, the government is open, and it's not the case that Congress, therefore, has been derelict in its duties in passing a budget, although that's not really passing a budget, and we should remember that that's a term that has very specific meaning, but that they've funded the government's operations, and so that responsibility is taken care of. But despite the fact that they have fulfilled their obligations, and that one of their obligations, by the way, is to command the purse strings of the country, then the president's encroachment on that prerogative, that would make for a very different kind of case, I would think, now that I think about it. The idea that the government is shut down currently, and then the president, during a shutdown, says, shifts blame for the whole thing and says, Congress is the one that has failed to appropriate funds to keep the government open, and I can't let their failure stand in my way of my perceived mission to protect the American people by erecting a border wall. That's a very different position from, well, actually it's different from even the one Block puts forward, which is to say, even if the government is closed, to say that it's closed because Congress has failed in its duties to appropriate funds, when we're watching one half of the Congress, one of the houses of Congress, the Senate, saying, well, we aren't appropriating because we refuse to vote on anything that the president won't sign, right? And we're taking our cues from the president. So then I guess the courts would have to decide, is the Congress acting independently here or isn't it? On the one hand, it's basing everything that it does on word from the president, but on the other hand, it's not completely out of keeping with congressional responsibility if you think that there's just no way that you're ever going to get enough votes to override the president. You may one day. Republicans may become more fed up than you were able to gauge, but you would still probably be entitled to claim in good faith that you thought that an override was unlikely, although saying that you weren't holding a vote on it because you didn't want to waste anybody's time, rather than finding out that you didn't, in fact, have enough votes to override a veto by voting on the thing and then having it vetoed. I don't know if that would be a strong enough claim to survive, in the face of accusations that you didn't exhaust all options before coming to the court. But then the third possible situation, a government that is open and that remains open because the president has decided that a better course of action for him politically would be to allow the government to open but declare the emergency anyway. In that situation, the Congress, by any definition really, has not failed in its duties to appropriate funds. It has complied with its congressional responsibilities and therefore ought to be entitled to all the ordinary deference to its wishes in appropriating the funds. They control the purse strings. They have enumerated how much will be spent and on what. And the president, despite this, says, no, the money will be spent elsewhere. That would be a great case, I would think. They would have a very hard time rejecting standing. Although, I guess, you know what? If I were a Republican judge or justice, I guess I would say, here's how you could parse it. You say, well, Congress, well, this is difficult. Congress has the purse strings. And then, of course, immediately a smart lawyer for Democrats in the House would say, well, just a moment. I mean, the House of Representatives has the purse strings, not the Congress generally, although that's not really true. I don't know. For whatever reason, it is said that way because revenue bills have to originate in the House, and it's even argued that appropriations bills have to originate in the House, but yet both houses have to pass them. So you would start by arguing that Congress had fulfilled its duties and had enumerated again what was to be spent and on what, and the president was ignoring these dictates and spending it on something else is him overstepping his boundaries. But who's asking? Who's asking the court to intervene here? If the Republican-led Senate doesn't join the lawsuit, is the Congress as a whole asking for this, or does the House of Representatives alone have standing to sue on behalf of the entire Congress, or does the House of Representatives have special standing to sue because of their responsibility for originating revenue bills, and some people think appropriations bills as well? Does that give them special claim to standing? And that's a novel question, I think, all by itself. So it will be very difficult to predict how a partisan judge who might yet be swayed by some fealty to originalism would decide on this. And I guess the polls being what they are with respect to support for Trump and the border wall, it's entirely possible that even a Republican judge may come down and say, just as we allowed the Republican House of Representatives to sue Obama over the health care bill, then we likewise have to give the Democratic House of Representatives the opportunity to sue a Republican president. Okay, that might very well be what shakes out of this thing. All right, let's see. We got another couple of items to include here, and I'm wondering whether I think I've painted myself into a corner on including one or two other things here. I may have to save them for later in the week. Let me throw a couple of pieces at you in the closing minutes here. One other shutdown piece. Let's see, one or two other shutdown pieces to throw in there, and then if we could make the segue and make it in time, let's try it this way. All right, one. Yet another Politico piece. Terrible day because I'm quoting Politico too often. From Caitlin Emma and Ted Hessen from end of last week comes this piece in Politico. Shutdown threatens to spoil eligibility for security clearances. This was a really annoying little bit here. The Trump administration is warning immigration agents working without pay back then, right, that their security clearances could be in jeopardy if they fail to cut back on spending or make arrangements with creditors during the government shutdown. Does this make sense to you immediately right off the bat? If it doesn't, I guess I'll have to continue. I mean, it's extraordinary. It's amazing. What an amazing position to take here. A top immigration and customs enforcement official, ICE, and we don't care about them, remember that, sent an email last Thursday, advising ICE employees to consider taking some affirmative steps to manage financial obligations as they miss a second paycheck. You remember the general instructions, both from Trump and of course from Wilbur Ross, others in government as well. and departmental heads suggesting that people who were furloughed or who were working without pay because they were essential employees, that they all ought to, well, sell your positions on eBay or just work things out with the grocery stores or the banks. Remember all of that and how ridiculous it was? In this case, check this out. ICE was telling its employees, you have to do that. Not that here's some suggestions on how to make ends meet, but you must do that. Now, why would they be doing that? Because, check this out, most of the workers are considered essential to national security and have been forced to work without pay for nearly 5 weeks, while also ineligible for unemployment, of course, by the way, since they're not furloughed. Now, debt and poor credit, this is why this happens. Debt and poor credit is a top factor for denying security clearances. However, since workers with financial issues are considered vulnerable to bribery and more likely to exploit their positions to make money through illegal activity like weapons and drug smuggling, or anything for that matter. Isn't that amazing? For employees holding security clearances, maintaining financial health and demonstrating responsible management of your finances takes on added importance. Waldemar Rodriguez, Associate Director of the Office of Professional Responsibility, wrote in this email, the missive advises ICE workers to consider taking steps to limit unnecessary financial obligations, maintain communications with lenders, and leverage any possible alternative arrangements for payments due. The agency made no guarantees it will not factor newfound financial issues into its clearance process, but said it weighs a variety of factors when making approval determinations. In other words, I guess long story short, because they were working and not getting paid, they were in financial distress. But they were ordered to mitigate that financial distress, not because, well, we're looking out for them and paternalism, but because if you're in financial distress, that makes you a target for bribery, which means you're a national security risk, which means we wouldn't be giving you the security clearance you would need to continue in your job, which is amazing all by itself because this is created by them. And all the more amazing because of what we also learned last week about Jared Kushner being given a pass on his security clearances, despite the fact that when I say somebody in financial distress or who has outstanding debts, particularly to foreign entities, probably the first person who comes to mind for you is Jared Kushner. And yet he's getting a pass on all of this. So it's pretty amazing. And I have some commentaries that I didn't even get to, and I probably won't have time to get to, from last week about how extraordinary that situation was. I mean, I think we made it pretty clear when we read those articles, but just to clear it up, and I guess we might as well fill the last minute or so with this information. Walter Schaub, you all know him, former director of the Office of Government Ethics, tweeting last week, the anti-nepotism law was enacted in 1967. Of course, he's talking about Ken Delanian's tweets about the career security specialists who were overruled in rejecting Kushner for his security clearance. The anti-nepotism law was enacted in 1967. Schaub reminds us. On at least 4 occasions over the next half century, DOJ said the law applied to White House staff. Then, at noon on January 20th, 2017, in other words, the day Trump was inaugurated, the DOJ reversed this position. This is precisely the type of harm the anti-nepotism law was designed to prevent. And yet, as he points out, this is exactly this is the first thing they did. They reversed the position that the Department of Justice has taken since 1967 for Trump for some reason. And, surprisingly or not, since then, Kushner's been allowed to skate on this stuff. And it's amazing that they're doing it to all people. I mean, I guess it couldn't happen to a better crew, right? Let it be ICE people who are getting screwed over by their own champion in all of this, while Kushner gets to skate. I mean, I hope that this drives former Trump supporters out of his camp as fast as the rest of the shutdown did. But I don't know. I shudder to think about whether it really might or not. There's another tweet storm perhaps we can sample a little bit from in the minute that's left. Former Obama White House lawyer Daniel Jacobson writing extensively on this. Having worked on security clearance issues at the White House, this story is terrifying. It is not normal for the head of personal security office to ever overrule the career employees who adjudicate clearances. This article, the one we read last week, says it's happened 30 times in the last year and a half. Reminding you that it takes some pretty bad stuff to be denied a clearance, although we just found out from the ICE agents that it doesn't take anything more than routine debt. We'll perhaps dive back into this one. We're not going to have a chance to get all the way through it, but I'll include it in the roundup for you to take a look at. It's now time to hand the microphone over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And once again, I've talked all the way up to our break, so I'll have to be selective in squeezing in what you'll be hearing about next.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, this gives us a chance to skip down to the bottom, what you'll be hearing about in the second half of today's show with Justice. Democrats are poised to throw an unprecedented spotlight on Trump's troop deployment to the U.S.-Mexico border. And have you seen this one? Roger Stone's Proud Boy allies are still backing him. No surprise, just disgusting. Stay tuned.